It was just after 2 in the morning when David Carter decided to call it a night. He had been driving for hours, weaving through Chicago's late-night chaos, bars spilling out crowds of drunk college kids, music thumping from nightclubs, couples stumbling down sidewalks with greasy takeout bags. But now, the city felt empty. His rideshare app showed almost no activity. The streets grew darker, quieter. David's eyelids were heavy, and the thought of his warm bed was almost enough to make him end the shift right there. Almost. Then a notification chimed. New request. Pickup, South Side. Industrial District. Destination, not listed. David frowned. Nearly every rider put in an address. The rare few who didn't were usually a pain, confused, drunk, or worse. But this one came with a small bonus attached. Search pricing. Enough for gas and then some. He sighed. One last ride. Then I'm done. The pickup location was desolate. The old industrial blocks were a skeleton of what they once were, warehouses with shattered windows, graffiti-tagged walls, broken streetlights casting uneven shadows. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp concrete. At first, he thought no one was there. Then he saw her. A woman stood under a flickering streetlight. Perfectly still, hands at her sides, head bowed slightly. She wore a long black coat buttoned to her throat. Her hair, dark and straight, fell forward, covering much of her face. She didn't wave. She didn't step forward. She just stood, waiting. David rolled down the passenger window. You call an Uber? The woman turned her head slowly, as if she had been expecting him. Without a word, she walked to the back door, opened it, and slid inside. Her movements were unnervingly calm. Not sluggish, not hurried, just deliberate. Evening, David said, forcing cheer into his voice. Where are we headed? The woman's reply was soft, almost too quiet to hear. Just drive. I'll tell you where to turn. David's stomach tightened. He hated trips like this. But arguing at 2 in the morning with a strange passenger wasn't worth it. He nodded and pulled away from the curb. For the first 10 minutes, silence filled the car. The woman didn't move, didn't check her phone, didn't even shift her weight. She just sat, staring out the window. David tried to break the tension. Quiet night, huh? No response. He chuckled nervously. Guess you're not much of a talker. The silence pressed heavier. He turned the radio on low, a soft jazz station humming through the speakers. That's when she spoke. You have 2 children. David's hands jerked on the wheel. The car swerved before he corrected. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Her face was still hidden by her hair, her gaze fixed on the glass. Excuse me? 2 children, she repeated softly. A boy and a girl. They share the room with the blue curtains. David's pulse spiked. Ethan and Lily. 7 and 4. Their bedroom did have blue curtains, curtains his wife had picked out. It wasn't something a stranger could guess. How do you know that? His voice came out sharper than intended. The woman tilted her head slightly. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I've been there. David slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a stop on the empty road. He spun in his seat, his voice breaking. Who the hell are you? The woman slowly lifted her face. The hair fell away, revealing skin so pale it seemed to glow under the dim dome light. Her lips parted, voice still calm, still whisper soft. Keep driving. The weight in her tone made his chest tighten. Against every instinct screaming to run, His foot pressed the gas, and the car rolled forward. She guided him through a series of turns. Out of the city, past the suburbs, into back roads lined with dark trees. The farther they went, the darker it became. No street lights. No other cars. Only the beam of his headlights cutting through endless black. David's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He wanted to stop. To throw her out. To scream. But every time he thought about it, he pictured Ethan and Lily. Alone in their room. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. A notification. Security alert, motion detected. Location, living room. David's throat tightened. His wife was out of town. The kids were home with the sitter. Nobody else should have been inside. He flicked his eyes to the mirror. What are you doing? What the hell are you? The woman sat perfectly still. Her whisper brushed the air. Keep driving. After what felt like an eternity, she said, turn here. A gravel road branched off the main one, cutting through thick woods. David shook his head. I'm not. Turn. His hands obeyed. The tires crunched on gravel, branches scraped against the car. The headlights illuminated a farmhouse at the end of the road. It was decayed, rotting wood sagging under its own weight. Windows broken. The front door hanging loose. Stop here, she whispered. David's voice shook. I'm not letting you out here. This place looks abandoned. The woman leaned forward, so close he felt her cold breath brush his ear. You don't want your children to wake up, alone. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down. Security alert, children's bedroom. The thumbnail showed Ethan and Lily in their beds. And a third figure. A tall, thin silhouette bending over them. David's stomach dropped. His breath caught in his throat. He twisted toward the back seat. Empty. The toys were there, though. Sitting neatly on the leather seat. Lily's stuffed rabbit. Ethan's action figure. His chest heaved. He turned back toward the farmhouse. The front door creaked open wider. Shadows shifted inside. Then, the app chimed. New ride request. Pickup, David's home address. David gripped the wheel until his nails dug into the leather. His heart hammered, sweat dripping down his temples. The house loomed in his headlights, silent, waiting. His phone vibrated again and again on the dash, each buzz like a warning he couldn't silence. Somewhere, in the distance, or maybe right beside him, he swore he heard a child's voice. Daddy, come home. When Evan Miller signed the lease for apartment 3B, he thought he had struck gold. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the laundromat across the street, but it was cheap, close to campus, and, most importantly, his. The building was old, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and boiler heat, but it had character. High ceilings, crown molding, fire escapes outside the windows. He moved in with 2 duffel bags, a second-hand couch, and a mattress on the floor. Life felt good. Independent. Free. The only thing that bothered him were the neighbors in 3A. The first night, as Evan was unpacking, he heard them through the wall. Not voices, exactly, just movement. A dragging sound, like furniture being scraped across the floor. Slow. Repeated. Then a dull thump, as if something heavy had fallen. He paused, listening. The noises stopped. He shrugged it off. Old buildings made sounds. People moved in at odd hours. He put in his earbuds and ignored it. But the next night, it happened again. Around midnight, Just as Evan was dozing off, the dragging began. A long, deliberate scrape across the floorboards. Then the muffled thud. And again. And again. By the third night, Evan's curiosity got the better of him. He pressed his ear to the wall. No voices. No laughter. No TV. Just the dragging. And under it, something else. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Like someone standing on the other side of the wall, waiting. Evan pulled away, unsettled. The next morning, he ran into the building's landlord, Mrs. Kearney, in the lobby. She was in her 70s, white hair in a bun, always carrying a ring of jangling keys. "Hey," Evan asked casually, "who lives in 3A? Her smile faltered. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. I hear noises at night. Thought maybe I'd introduce myself." Mrs. Kearney's eyes lingered on him a moment too long. Then she forced a smile. "Oh, they keep to themselves. Best not to bother them." Before he could ask more, she shuffled away. The nights grew stranger. Sometimes Evan would wake to the sound of whispering. Not words he could make out, just low murmurs bleeding through the wall. Other times, he swore he heard someone knocking softly, 3 times in rhythm. He began sleeping with the lamp on. One night, around 2 a.m., he got up for water. As he passed his front door, he noticed something. A shadow under the crack. Someone was standing in the hallway. Perfectly still. Evan froze. The shadow didn't move. He stood there, holding his breath, until finally the shadow shifted and drifted away. When he opened the door a minute later, the hallway was empty. The next day, he told his friend Marcus about it over coffee. "Dude, that's creepy as hell," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Sounds like you got some weirdos next door. You should complain." "I tried," Evan said. Mrs. Kearney brushed it off. "Then move." "Seriously. I'd be out of there so fast." Evan laughed it off, but deep down, he felt trapped. He couldn't afford another place. And besides, part of him didn't want to leave. Part of him wanted to know. That weekend, the noises escalated. At exactly midnight, the dragging began again. Louder this time. More frantic. The thud shook the wall, rattling picture frames. Evan sat up in bed, heart racing. He pressed his ear to the wall. The sounds were closer, directly behind his headboard. Then came the breathing. Heavy. Wet. Almost animal. He whispered, "Hello," before he could stop himself. The breathing stopped. For a full minute, silence pressed against the wall. And then, slowly, deliberately, 3 knocks answered back. The next morning, Evan decided to watch. He positioned his desk by the window, angled so he could see the 3A door across the narrow courtyard. He kept his phone ready. Hours passed. Afternoon faded to evening. Lights came on in other apartments, but 3A stayed dark. No one went in. No one came out. Around midnight, though, Evan's lamp flickered. A chill swept the room. And through the blinds, he saw it. The door of 3A cracked open. For a moment, the hallway was empty. Then, a figure stepped out. Tall. Thin. Wearing clothes that hung too loose, as if they belonged to someone else. The figure's head turned unnaturally far, scanning the hall, before slipping silently down the stairs. Evan's stomach knotted. His phone shook in his hands. He snapped a photo, but the flash went off, bright against the dark courtyard. The figure stopped. Its head turned. And even across the courtyard, Evan felt it. It was staring at him. He aimed the blinds shut, heart slamming. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Delete the photo. Evan dropped the phone. His mouth went dry. How did they get his number? He didn't respond. He couldn't. He shoved the phone in a drawer and left the apartment, wandering campus just to avoid going back. But when he returned that evening, something waited for him. Pinned to his door was the photo he had taken. Printed. Enlarged. His own blinds visible in the reflection. That night, the whispers were louder. More voices. Layers of them, all bleeding through the walls. Some laughed, high and broken. Others wept. One voice, low and guttural, repeated a word over and over that Evan couldn't understand. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed again. This time, a video. His children's bedroom. Except, Evan didn't have children. The video showed a small room, toys scattered on the floor, wallpaper peeling. And in the corner, something crouched. Watching. Its head turned toward the camera. The feed cut. Evan was done. He packed a bag, ready to bolt. But when he opened his front door, he froze. Every door in the hallway stood open. 2A, 2B. 3A, 4A. 4B. Every apartment, yawning wide like empty mouths. Except, they weren't empty. Shapes stood inside each doorway. Still, silent. Watching him. Their faces blurred by shadow, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. Evan stumbled back into his apartment, slamming the door. His breath came in sharp gasps. The whispers rose. Louder. Pressing in from all sides. His lamp flickered out. And in the dark, the wall behind him groaned. Dragging. Thumping. Breathing. Closer than ever. Right against his ear. By morning, apartment 3B was empty. The landlord told anyone who asked that Evan had left suddenly, no forwarding address. His rent was paid through the month, but his belongings were gone. When the new tenant moved in a few weeks later, they noticed something odd. Scratched into the paint on the wall shared with 3A, faint but legible, were words etched by desperate hands. Don't listen. Don't look. Don't stay. When Daniel Ross accepted the job, it seemed almost too easy. $20 an hour, under the table, for a night shift that mostly meant sitting in a chair and making sure an old man didn't hurt himself while he slept. The old man's name was Arthur Bellamy, a widower in his late 70s who lived in a sprawling Victorian house on the edge of town. The kind of house people whispered about when they drove past, too big, too old, too many shadows in its windows. Daniel needed money. He was 21, a college junior, and his student loans weren't going to pay themselves. His professor's wife worked at the hospital, and she'd passed his name along for the job. Arthur just needs someone in the house overnight, she explained. He has episodes. Sometimes sleepwalking. You don't have to do much, just keep watch. Daniel thought it sounded boring. But boring was fine. The first night, he arrived at 9. The house loomed like a relic, its pointed roof and narrow windows silhouetted against a pale moon. The porch sagged. The yard was overgrown. When Daniel stepped inside, the smell hit him immediately, dust, mothballs, and something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. Arthur was waiting in the parlor. Thin, pale, hair white as paper. His eyes, though, were sharp. Uncomfortably sharp. You'll stay in the upstairs hall, Arthur said without introduction. His voice was gravelly, deliberate. Outside my room? If I leave, you stop me. If you hear anything, you don't come in. Do you understand? Daniel blinked. Yeah. Sure. Arthur's gaze lingered. Do not come into my room. No matter what. The upstairs hall was dim, lit only by a single yellow lamp. Daniel set up his chair by Arthur's door. The house creaked and groaned around him, the way old houses do, but otherwise, it was quiet. For the first hour, Daniel scrolled through his phone. He almost relaxed. Then, just past midnight, he heard it. A sound from inside Arthur's room. Not footsteps. Not movement. Whispering. Low, hurried whispers, as though two people were having an argument on the other side of the door. Daniel froze, straining to listen. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, insistent. He remembered Arthur's warning. Don't come in. So he didn't. But he didn't sleep either. The next morning, Arthur emerged at 6 sharp. His clothes were immaculate, his hair neatly combed, as though nothing unusual had happened. How was your first night? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Fine. Quiet. Arthur studied him. The corners of his mouth twitched, almost like a smile. Good. Tonight will be easier. The second night, the whispers started earlier. 11:30. A harsh, rapid exchange, like an argument in another language. Daniel pressed his ear to the door, pulse quickening. This time, there was something else. A laugh. Not Arthur's. High-pitched, shrill, almost childlike. Daniel jerked back, heart pounding. He stared at the doorknob, half expecting it to turn. But it didn't. The door stayed closed. The voices eventually faded into silence. At dawn, Arthur stepped out, calm and collected as before. Anything unusual? He asked. Daniel swallowed. No. Nothing. Arthur's eyes lingered on him, searching. Then he nodded. Good. By the fourth night, Daniel wasn't sure he could take it anymore. The whispers had grown louder. Sometimes, they rose into cries, ragged, desperate. Other times, they dropped into guttural moans that rattled through the wood. At one point, Daniel swore he heard something scratching at the inside of the door. Fingernails, dragging. And always, that laugh. It came without warning, shrill and mocking, until Daniel had to clap his hands over his ears. That morning, Arthur caught him in the hall. You heard them, Arthur said simply. Daniel's stomach dropped. Heard, what? Arthur leaned closer. His eyes were bloodshot, fever bright. The ones that visit. They come at night. They speak to me. They want me to go with them. Daniel tried to laugh it off. Maybe it's just dreams? Arthur's expression hardened. No. They're real. And they don't like you being here. Daniel told himself he'd quit. The money wasn't worth it. But when he looked at his empty bank account, he went back the next night. At 1 a.m., the door creaked. Not much, just an inch, maybe 2. Daniel's blood ran cold. He stood, staring. Inside, the whispers swelled. Something moved in the darkness beyond the crack. Not Arthur. Taller. Thinner. Its hand, a pale, bony hand, curled around the doorframe. Daniel's breath caught. The door began to open wider. No, Daniel whispered. Stay inside. The hand froze. For a moment, silence. Then the door slammed shut so hard the lamp flickered. By dawn, Daniel was shaking. Arthur emerged, calm as ever. He paused when he saw Daniel's face. They touched the door, didn't they? Daniel nodded mutely. Arthur's expression darkened. You shouldn't stay. They've noticed you now. Daniel planned to leave. He really did. But that night, curiosity won. He had to know what was inside that room. At midnight, when the whispers rose, he stood. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. Arthur's warning echoed in his head, do not come into my room. No matter what. Daniel turned the knob anyway. The door creaked open. The room was dark, curtains drawn tight. Arthur sat upright in bed, eyes closed, lips moving rapidly in whispers. His hands clutched the sheets, knuckles white. But he wasn't alone. Figures crowded the room. Pale, faceless figures, their limbs too long, their bodies stretched thin like shadows pulled into human shape. They leaned over Arthur, whispering into his ears, pressing their mouths against his skin. One of them turned. And though it had no eyes, Daniel knew it saw him. The whispers stopped. The room fell silent. Arthur's eyes snapped open. You weren't supposed to come in, he said softly. The figures moved. They rushed toward Daniel, silent and swift, their pale hands reaching. The door slammed shut. When Mrs. Kearney, the landlord, checked on the house a week later, she found Arthur alone in his bed. His heart had stopped in the night. Daniel was never found. But in the upstairs hall, carved faintly into the wood of the chair outside Arthur's room, were 3 desperate words. Don't open it. The sign flickered weakly against the night sky, Pine Hollow Motel, vacancy. Only half the bulbs worked, casting a sickly orange glow across the cracked parking lot. Mara Jennings had been driving for 12 hours straight when she saw it. The interstate stretched endlessly behind her, and the rain-slicked back roads of rural Pennsylvania weren't making things any easier. She was exhausted. Her GPS had lost signal hours ago, and the gas gauge was dipping dangerously low. The motel was the first sign of civilization she'd seen in nearly 50 miles. She pulled in. The office smelled of stale coffee and mildew. A bell sat on the counter. When Mara tapped it, the sound echoed far too loud in the empty lobby. After a long moment, a man appeared. Thin, gaunt, dressed in a faded uniform that looked a decade out of date. His name tag read Calvin. One room, he asked flatly. Yeah, Mara said. Just for the night. Calvin slid a key across the counter. It was an actual metal key, heavy and tarnished, with the number 7 engraved into the tag. Cash only, he added. Mara handed over 40 crumpled dollars. He didn't offer a receipt. Room 7 was at the far end of the lot. The door stuck before it opened, hinges groaning like a scream. Inside, the room was worse than she expected. Faded carpet. Stains on the wallpaper. A bedspread patterned with tiny flowers, worn nearly to threads. The air reeked faintly of mold, and beneath it, something sourer. Mara locked the door, drew the curtains, and collapsed onto the bed. The springs groaned. But exhaustion won. She was asleep within minutes. The sound woke her. A knock. Soft, deliberate. Mara blinked at the clock. 2:13 a.m. Another knock, louder this time. She sat up. Her heart thudded. Hello, she called. No answer. She crept to the door, pressing her eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. But when she turned back toward the bed, her stomach dropped. The curtains were open. She was sure, absolutely sure, she'd closed them. Mara barely slept the rest of the night. At dawn, she dragged herself back to the office. Calvin sat behind the desk, staring at nothing. "Someone was knocking on my door," Mara said. "In the middle of the night." Calvin's eyes flicked toward her, dull and uninterested. "No one's checked in for weeks." Mara frowned. "What about the other rooms?" "Empty," Calvin said. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're the only guest." By afternoon, Mara debated leaving. But the rain was relentless, and the nearest town was 30 miles away. She told herself she was being paranoid. One more night. That was it. That evening, she double-checked everything. Curtains closed tight. Door bolted. Lights left on. Still, when she woke at 3 a.m., the curtains were open again. This time, she didn't hear knocking. She heard breathing. Slow, steady, just behind her ear. She spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. The breathing stopped. At dawn, she stormed back to the office. "This place is messed up," she snapped. "I'm leaving." Calvin didn't move. He just tilted his head. "You checked into room 7, he said softly. "Didn't anyone tell you?" Mara's skin prickled. "Tell me what?" His lips twitched. "Nobody checks out of room 7. She didn't wait. She bolted to her car, tossed her bag in the passenger seat, and jammed the key onto the dash. But when she turned the ignition, nothing. The engine wouldn't even cough. She tried again. And again. The gas gauge needle sank to empty. But she'd filled the tank yesterday. The sun set. Mara sat in the locked car, shaking. Every shadow in the parking lot seemed to move. She thought about calling for help, but her phone was dead, though she knew it had been fully charged. At 1 a.m., the knocking started again. This time, it came from inside the car. The back seat. Mara didn't turn around. She couldn't. A voice, low and rasping, whispered inches from her ear. "You shouldn't have stayed here." When a highway patrol officer stopped at Pine Hollow weeks later, the motel looked abandoned. Windows shattered. Weeds swallowing the lot. Inside room 7, the bedspread was coated in dust. But on the wall above the headboard, carved deep into the plaster, were fresh words. "Don't open the curtains." It was a crisp Friday night in early October, the kind of evening when the air carries that faint bite of approaching winter, and every porch glows orange with pumpkins and flickering candles. Across town, the high school stadium lights cut through the dark sky, and the shouts of the crowd echoed down the streets. Almost everyone in town was at the football game, or gathered at bars and diners that stayed open late to catch it on TV. 17-year-old Emily Carter was not. She was curled up on the couch at home, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, scrolling idly through her phone when the call came in. The landline rang, which was odd in itself. Hardly anyone used the landline anymore. It was her mother's friend, Laura Dalton. Her voice was hurried, urgent, almost breathless. "Emily, honey, I am so sorry to call you like this, but we're desperate. Our sitter just canceled last minute. We have a dinner downtown we absolutely can't miss, and we don't know who else to call. Could you come watch the kids for just a few hours? They'll already be in pajamas, they're easy. Snacks in the kitchen, bedtime at 9. We'll be back before midnight, I promise. Please." Emily hesitated. She hadn't babysat in months, Not since she'd gotten busier with school, but she could use the cash. Besides, she liked the Dalton kids. Jacob was 8, chatty but sweet. Lily was 5, still carrying around a stuffed bunny wherever she went. "Sure," Emily said finally. "I'll be there in 20. The Dalton house sat on the far edge of town, tucked into one of those newer subdivisions where every home looked a little too similar, with trimmed lawns and wide driveways. Their house was bigger than most, 2 stories, white siding, tall windows that gleamed faintly under the porch light. When Emily pulled up, the neighborhood was eerily still. Almost every other driveway was empty, cars gone, families out at the game. A single street light buzzed faintly at the corner, moths flitting around it. Laura Dalton met her at the door, already dressed in a navy cocktail dress, clutching a black clutch bag. Behind her, her husband, Mark, adjusted his tie impatiently. "Oh, thank you, Emily," Laura said, relief in her voice. "You're a lifesaver." "The kids are upstairs brushing teeth. Snacks are in the kitchen. Emergency numbers are on the fridge. They really should be no trouble. Just tuck them in, keep an ear out." "That's it." Mark gave a brief nod of acknowledgement. His eyes were tired, as though he hadn't slept in days. And then, with barely another word, they were gone. Their car reversed down the driveway, taillights fading until Emily was left alone in the big, quiet house. The kids came bounding down the stairs a few minutes later. Jacob, with his messy hair and Spider-Man pajamas, grinned when he saw her. "Emily, you're babysitting us tonight?" Lily trailed behind him, holding her bunny by one ear, her big brown eyes fixed on Emily with shy relief. "Yep," Emily said, smiling. "You two ready for bed?" They groaned in unison. Emily laughed, letting them stay up just a little longer. She made popcorn, turned on the TV in the living room, and let them watch cartoons while she sat nearby scrolling her phone. By 8:30, she ushered them upstairs, read them a chapter from Charlotte's Web, and tucked them into their beds. Jacob's room was across the hall from Lily's, both doors left cracked open. "Good night, Emily," Lily whispered, hugging her bunny close. "Night, Squirt," Jacob said, already half asleep. By 9, the house was silent again. Emily settled on the couch, scrolling through Instagram, occasionally glancing at the muted glow of the television. That's when she heard it. A noise. Faint. From upstairs. Her body stilled. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate creaks across the hallway floorboards. She froze, listening. The Daltons didn't have pets. "Jacob," she called, voice tentative. "Lily?" Silence. She climbed the stairs carefully, her sneakers making no sound on the carpet. Both kids were sound asleep in their rooms. She lingered, watching the steady rise and fall of their chests, the soft sound of breathing. She exhaled. Probably just the house settling. But as she turned back toward the stairs, she noticed something odd. The hallway window was open. She was certain it had been shut. The curtains billowed softly in the cool October breeze. Her stomach knotted. She closed it firmly, locked the latch, and pulled the curtains shut. Downstairs again, she tried to shake it off. Houses made noises. Drafts happened. At 9:45, it happened again. Not footsteps this time. A voice. She muted the TV, straining to hear. It came from the baby monitor on the end table. Static hissed, followed by a low murmur. Emily leaned closer. It wasn't Jacob. It wasn't Lily. The whisper was too low, too harsh. She couldn't make out the words, but it chilled her to the bone. She glanced at the screen. Both kids were still asleep. But the whispering continued. And it wasn't coming from their room. It was coming from somewhere near the monitor itself. Her throat dry, Emily unplugged the device. The whispering cut off instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. By 10:30, she was jittery, nerves stretched tight. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. Then, the phone rang. Not her cell. The landline on the wall in the kitchen. The sound made her jump, echoing too loud in the empty house. She hesitated before picking it up. Hello? A beat of static. Then a man's voice, low, deliberate, whispering. Don't let them out of your sight. The line went dead. Her stomach dropped. She tried calling Laura Dalton's cell, then Mark's. Both went straight to voicemail. Emily rushed upstairs, flung open Jacob's door. Still asleep. Lily's too. She sat on the top stair after that, phone clutched tight, watching both rooms. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The house was silent. And then another sound. A creak. From the hallway closet. Emily's breath hitched. She crept down the hall, pulse pounding, every step heavier than the last. The closet door was cracked open. Just an inch. She reached out with a trembling hand. Pushed it wide. Empty. But the smell hit her. Sweat. Stale breath. The unmistakable scent of someone who had been there. Her skin crawled. She backed away, heart racing, and grabbed the phone. 911, what's your emergency? Emily whispered fast, I'm babysitting, and I think someone's in the house. Please, send someone. The dispatcher stayed calm, kept her on the line, said officers were on the way. Emily clutched the phone like a lifeline as she hurried back upstairs. She needed to keep the kids safe. She pushed Jacob's door open. His bed was empty. Her heart stuttered. She rushed across the hall. Lily's bed was empty too. Her hands shook. Jacob? Lily? No answer. She tore through the house, calling their names. Silence. And then she saw it. The front door. Wide open. Headlights cut across the living room wall. Relief surged through her chest. The police. 2 officers stepped inside, flashlights sweeping. They searched every room, every closet, every inch of the house. Nothing. Emily tried to explain between ragged breaths, tears in her eyes. They were just here. I tucked them in. I checked. They were asleep. And then they were gone. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. That's when one of them noticed the unplugged baby monitor. It was glowing. Static flickered on the tiny screen. Then it cleared, showing a dark, cramped space. A windowless room. Bare concrete walls. And in the corner, Jacob and Lily, huddled together. Silent. Their wide eyes staring directly into the camera. The feed cut out. The screen went black. When the Daltons returned later that night, frantic and confused, they found their home filled with officers, search dogs, and neighbors in pajamas gathered on the lawn. But the children were never found. No trace. No footprints. No forced entry. The baby monitor was taken as evidence. But no one could ever explain what Emily had seen that night. Or where, exactly, the signal had been coming from. The rain had been falling for hours. Thick sheets of water hammered the windshield, blurring the world into shifting shadows and streaks of neon. Daniel retightened his grip on the steering wheel, squinting through the downpour. His wipers groaned back and forth, barely keeping up. He hadn't planned on being out this late. The business trip had run long, and he'd misjudged the drive home. The GPS rerouted him off the interstate, down Highway 41, a long, narrow strip of road that seemed to stretch endlessly through farmland and forest. Now it was close to midnight, and his eyelids felt heavy. His rental car hummed against the wet pavement, tires hissing in the storm. That's when he saw it. A flicker of neon in the distance. A sign half hidden in the rain. Pinewood Motel. Vacancy. Daniel exhaled with relief. He hadn't seen another set of headlights in nearly an hour, and the storm only seemed to be getting worse. His phone had no signal. The thought of pulling over on the shoulder to sleep in his car filled him with dread. So when the narrow driveway appeared, he turned without hesitation. The Pinewood Motel was a low, L-shaped building, its faded brick walls streaked with water, the neon sign sputtering faintly above the office. Only 2 other cars sat in the parking lot. Daniel parked and jogged through the rain into the front office. The lobby was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of mildew. A dusty potted plant slumped in the corner. The man at the desk looked up slowly from a newspaper. He was thin, pale, with a lined face and eyes that didn't quite meet Daniel's. "Room?" the man asked flatly. "Yes. Just for the night." The man slid a ledger across the counter. Daniel signed his name, hands still damp from the rain. "Room 7, the clerk said, handing him a brass key on a worn leather fob. "End of the hall." Daniel nodded. "Do you have Wi-Fi here?" "My phone's dead." The clerk's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Signal's weak. Storm knocks it out. You won't need it." Something in the way he said that made Daniel pause. But exhaustion tugged at him harder than suspicion. He just wanted a bed, a shower, and a few hours of dreamless sleep. Room 7 was at the far end, as promised. The hallway was lined with peeling wallpaper, the carpet spongy from years of damp. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, buzzing in the silence. Inside, the room was simple, a double bed with a faded floral comforter, a nightstand with a lamp, a small TV, and a bathroom with cracked tiles. Daniel tossed his suitcase on the chair, plugged his phone into the wall, and sat heavily on the bed. Springs creaked under his weight. The rain pounded the window in steady rhythm. He tried the TV. Only static. With a sigh, he shut it off and stretched out on the bed, listening to the storm. Sleep came faster than he expected. He woke to a sound. A faint knock. At first, he thought it was the rain against the window. But no, it was sharper. 3 slow, deliberate taps. He sat up, groggy, blinking into the dark. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:13 a.m. Another knock. This time louder. Daniel's throat tightened. "Hello?" he called, voice hoarse. Silence. He crept to the door, pressed his eye to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. Shaking his head, he told himself it was nothing. Maybe the wind had rattled something. Maybe he'd dreamed it. He crawled back into bed, pulled the blanket tighter. But just as his eyes began to close, he heard it again. Not a knock this time. A whisper. Right outside the door. "Daniel." His heart slammed against his ribs. He hadn't told anyone he was here. The clerk had barely even looked at him. No one knew him. No one should know his name. He sat frozen, staring at the door, every nerve in his body screaming. The whisper came again. Softer. Almost playful. "Daniel." He stumbled backward, hand groping for his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up. No signal. The doorknob rattled violently. Daniel choked on a shout. He lunged forward, jamming the chain lock across the door just as it jerked against the frame. The whole door shook under the pressure, as if someone were leaning into it, testing it. Then, silence. He didn't sleep again. He sat awake, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door until the faint glow of dawn seeped through the curtains. By morning, the storm had passed. The parking lot shimmered with puddles under a pale sky. He went to the front desk, pale and shaking, ready to demand answers. But the clerk was gone. The desk was empty, the newspaper folded neatly. On the counter sat the ledger. Daniel flipped it open, scanning the last page. His name was the only one written in. No other guests. No one in the entire building. Daniel left the key on the counter and hurried out to his car. The lot was silent. His was the only car parked there. As he pulled back onto Highway 41, his stomach twisted. He glanced in the rearview mirror, heart still hammering. The Pinewood Motel stood there, shrinking into the distance. And just for a moment, in the window of room 7, he swore he saw a figure. Standing. Watching. Smiling. The moving truck rumbled down the quiet suburban street, its headlights sweeping over rows of nearly identical houses. Each one had neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and the faint glow of televisions flickering in their living rooms. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved politely but never asked too many questions. At the very end of the cul-de-sac stood number 112, Ashwood Lane. It was the only house with no lights on. The paint on the shutters was peeling. Weeds pushed stubbornly through cracks in the driveway. The for sale sign out front had been there so long the colors had faded, the phone number worn down by sun and rain. But to Kara and Matt Whitfield, it was perfect. They'd been hunting for a house for months, and with their second child on the way, the cramped 2-bedroom apartment wasn't enough anymore. The realtor had warned them the property had a history. Something about families moving out quickly, unable to settle. But the price was nearly half what the others in the neighborhood were asking, and Matt had laughed off the rumors. Superstition, he'd said, tossing the keys into Kara's palm. A house is just wood and nails. That first night, as the movers unloaded boxes into the echoing rooms, Kara felt the weight of silence pressing in. Even the kids, 6-year-old Lily and 2-year-old Owen, seemed subdued, clinging to her legs, wide-eyed at the empty rooms. The first week passed uneventfully. They painted the nursery. They unpacked the kitchen. Matt mowed the lawn. But at night, Kara began to notice things. It started with the sounds. A faint tapping in the walls. Scratches just beneath the floorboards. Pipes groaning, though the water wasn't running. At first, she told herself it was an old house settling. But then Lily began waking in the middle of the night, crying. When Kara went to comfort her, she always said the same thing. "There's someone in my room." Kara would switch on the light, searching under the bed, in the closet. Nothing. But Lily insisted. A tall man, standing in the corner. "He doesn't like when we're here," she whispered. Matt brushed it off his childhood imagination. New house, new fears. She'll get used to it. But Kara couldn't shake the unease. One night, unable to sleep, she padded downstairs for a glass of water. The house was still, shadows pooling in the corners. As she passed the front door, something caught her eye. The deadbolt. It was unlocked. She was certain she had locked it before bed. Frowning, she turned it back, the click echoing too loud in the silence. As she set her glass in the sink, she heard it again. A faint click. She turned. The deadbolt had slid open on its own. Her breath caught. She hurried up the stairs, heart pounding, every instinct screaming not to look back. By the second month, the tension in the house was unbearable. Matt grew short-tempered, restless. He spent long hours in the garage, tinkering with projects he never finished. Kara noticed him staring sometimes, not at her, not at the kids, but past them, toward the corners of the room, as if listening to something only he could hear. Lily refused to sleep in her own bed. She insisted on curling up between Kara and Matt at night, her small body trembling with nightmares. And little Owen, who had just begun to talk, would sit in his crib babbling to the empty corner of the nursery. One word, over and over. Man, man, man. It was late October when Kara finally broke. The kids were asleep. Matt was in the garage again. Kara sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, the glow of the screen casting pale light across her face. She typed 112, Ashwood Lane history into the search bar. The results were buried, old newspaper archives and half-broken links. But slowly, the story came together. 30 years ago, the house had belonged to a man named Harold Vance. A quiet, solitary figure who neighbors described as strange and watchful. Children on the street whispered that he stood at his windows late at night, just staring. In 1991, the police had found the bodies. 3 children. None of them his own. They had gone missing over the course of 2 summers. Lured from their beds in the dead of night. Their remains discovered beneath the floorboards of Harold's basement. Harold himself was never caught. Some said he fled. Others whispered he never left. Kara's stomach turned as she scrolled through the grainy black and white photo of the house. It was unmistakable. The same peeling shutters. The same cracked driveway. Her hands trembled as she slammed the laptop shut. That night, she dreamed of footsteps in the hallway. She woke to find the bedroom door ajar. And on the carpet, just inside the room, a muddy footprint. Small. Child-sized. But Lily was asleep beside her. Things escalated quickly after that. Objects moved on their own. Toys arranged in strange patterns across the floor. The sound of laughter echoing faintly from the basement. One evening, as Kara folded laundry, Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered. "The man says you shouldn't be here. He says it's still his house." Kara's blood ran cold. "What man, sweetheart?" But Lily only shook her head. On Halloween night, Matt vanished. Kara woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of Owen crying. She reached for Matt's side of the bed, empty. The garage door stood open, cold air pouring in. His tools lay scattered across the floor. His phone sat abandoned on the workbench. But Matt was gone. The police searched for days. No trace. No footprints. No witnesses. It was as if he had stepped into the night and vanished. Kara tried to stay. She told herself she had to be strong for the kids. But the house seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. Doors slammed on their own. The walls groaned like they were alive. At night, she heard whispering through the vents, a chorus of children's voices chanting in the dark. And then came the night she found Lily's bed empty. The window wide open. Curtains fluttering in the cold. She screamed her daughter's name until her throat was raw, until neighbors came pounding at the door. But Lily was gone. 2 weeks later, Kara packed what little she had left and fled the house with Owen. The for sale sign went back up. And there it stands still, at the end of Ashwood Lane. The shutters peeling, the driveway cracked, waiting for another family. The neighbors don't speak of it. They don't look at the windows when they pass. But sometimes, late at night, when the street is quiet and the wind is still, they swear they hear it. The faint sound of children laughing. From somewhere deep inside. When Emily Carter signed the lease for apartment 6B, she thought she'd finally caught a break. After years of scraping by in cramped studios and sublets, this one-bedroom unit in Brooklyn Heights felt like a small miracle. The rent was suspiciously cheap for the area, but the landlord, an older man with a thinning hairline and darting eyes, had been quick to push the papers across the desk. Previous tenant left in a hurry, he'd muttered. Place has been empty a while. If you want it, it's yours. Emily didn't ask questions. At 29, working long hours as a nurse, she didn't have the luxury of being picky. She moved in the following week, her few belongings filling the space easily. The apartment itself was nothing special, faded carpet, yellowing paint, a view of the brick wall across the alley, but it was hers. A place to breathe. A place to finally feel at home. Or so she thought. The first strange thing happened on her second night. Emily was brushing her teeth when she heard it, a faint click. Like the sound of a camera shutter. She froze, foam still in her mouth, ears straining. Silence. Shaking her head, she rinsed and went to bed. She chalked it up to the radiator or maybe the neighbors upstairs. Old buildings made noises. But as she lay in the dark, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days, the unease grew. Her keys weren't where she left them. A coffee mug she swore she had washed was back in the sink, ringed with cold residue. One morning she woke to find her front door ajar, though she was certain she had locked it before bed. She began double-checking everything, doors, windows, light switches. Still, things moved. Shifted. Changed. And always, that faint clicking sound at night. One evening, coming home from a late shift at the hospital, Emily found a note slipped under her door. At first, she thought it was junk mail. But when she unfolded the paper, her stomach dropped. Written in neat, deliberate handwriting were the words. I like when you wear the blue scrubs. They suit you. Her pulse hammered. She spun, scanning the hallway. Empty. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paint. Hands trembling, she locked the door and shoved a chair beneath the knob. But sleep didn't come that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the building magnified into something sinister. By the end of the month, she was exhausted. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes. Her nerves frayed at the slightest sound. Even at work, she caught herself glancing over her shoulder, scanning the waiting room, convinced someone was following her. And then came the photographs. They appeared on her kitchen counter one morning, though she always locked her door. Glossy prints. Pictures of her. Sleeping. The breath left her lungs. She dropped the stack, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold them. One by one, the images slid across the floor, her face in the half-light, her hair fanned across the pillow, her body curled beneath the sheets. The angles were impossible. They were taken from inside the room. Emily called the police. 2 uniformed officers arrived, sympathetic but dismissive. Probably some creep with a long-lens camera, one said. These old buildings, windows don't line up right. Reflection can play tricks. We'll file a report. They left soon after, their footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Emily standing in the middle of her apartment clutching the photographs. She knew they were wrong. These weren't taken from outside. She could feel it. That night, she pushed her dresser in front of the bedroom door. She checked the closets 3 times. She barely slept, jolting awake at every sound. Around 3:15 a.m., she heard it again. The click. This time, she sat up in bed, holding her breath. The sound came again, sharper, closer. Her eyes darted across the room. And that was when she saw it. A small, dark circle in the corner of the wall. No bigger than a coin. A camera lens. Her blood turned to ice. She called the landlord the next morning, voice shaking with fury. There are cameras in this apartment. Someone's been watching me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You should probably move out, he said flatly. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. What? Are you kidding me? I want this place inspected, now. The line went dead. Panicked, she tore through the apartment. And she found them. Behind the air vent. In the smoke detector. Even inside the bathroom mirror, tucked behind the glass. Tiny cameras, wired into the walls. Her hands shook as she ripped them out one by one, cords dangling like veins. She stuffed them into a trash bag, heart pounding, and fled the apartment, checking over her shoulder every step of the way. She spent the night at a friend's place, too afraid to return. But the next day, she had no choice, her belongings were still inside. When she unlocked the door, the apartment was silent. Too silent. Her trash bag sat in the middle of the floor. Empty. The cameras were gone. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have touched them. Now I'll have to watch closer. Emily never returned to apartment 6B after that night. The landlord refused to answer her calls. The police dismissed her story as paranoia, suggesting she seek counseling. She moved in with her sister across town, sleeping with the lights on, double-checking the locks every hour. But even now, months later, she swears she still hears it sometimes. That faint click in the dark. Like a shudder. Like someone, somewhere, is still watching. Samantha Pierce had never liked driving at night. It wasn't just the darkness, though that was part of it. It was the isolation, the way the world seemed to stretch endlessly when there were no landmarks, no cities, nothing but your headlights cutting a tunnel through the void. But tonight she had no choice. Her younger sister, Rachel, had been calling her all week, begging her to come out to Albuquerque. Rachel was going through a rough patch, her marriage on the rocks, bills piling up, a baby on the way, and Sam had promised she'd be there before morning. So she had filled the tank of her little silver Honda Civic at a rundown gas station outside of Flagstaff, bought 2 oversized coffees from a bored cashier, and told herself it was only 5 hours of desert driving. She'd be fine. By the time she merged onto Interstate 40, it was nearly midnight. The road stretched ahead like a black ribbon, endless and merciless. For the first hour, nothing happened. Sam kept the radio on for company, though the only station that came in was half static, half twangy country music. The desert at night was a strange, living thing. Wind rattled against her car, and shadows shifted in the corners of her vision, born from the moonlight spilling across mesas and cacti. Her coffee had already gone lukewarm when she saw him. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. Just a figure in the corner of her headlights, standing on the shoulder of the road. A man. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a long, heavy coat that billowed slightly in the desert wind. His face was pale, his eyes dark. He had one arm raised, thumb out, the universal sign of a hitchhiker. Sam's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She wasn't stupid. Every true crime documentary she'd ever watched, every news report about missing women, they all began with a woman alone at night, making a bad decision. Her gut screamed at her not to stop. She didn't. She pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the man slide past her window and disappear into darkness. But curiosity got the better of her. She flicked her eyes to the rearview mirror. Her stomach dropped. The road behind her was empty. No man. No shadow. Nothing but blacktop stretching endlessly into the desert night. Sam told herself she was just tired. Exhaustion played tricks. Shadows became people, trees looked like faces. She was fine. But 10 minutes later, she saw him again. The same man. Same long coat. Same pale face. Same outstretched thumb. Her mouth went dry. She knew the road she was on. There were no turnoffs, no intersections, no way someone could have gotten ahead of her on foot. It wasn't possible. Her heart thudded harder in her chest as she pressed her foot down on the gas. Her Civic's engine whined in protest, but the speedometer crept higher. The man shrank in her rearview mirror, swallowed by the night. Still, her hands trembled. By now, her nerves were raw. Every mile marker felt familiar, as though she'd passed it before. The desert seemed to blur together, the mesas and rocks repeating themselves in an endless loop. At 12:07 a.m., she saw him again. But this time, he wasn't on the shoulder. He was in the middle of the road. Sam let out a strangled cry as she yanked the wheel, the Civic swerving violently onto the rumble strip. Her tires shrieked against the asphalt. Coffee splashed from the cup holder, scalding her thigh. When she straightened the car and looked in the mirror, bracing for the sight of a broken body sprawled across the pavement, there was nothing. The highway was empty. Sam's breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel her pulse in her throat, hammering so hard it hurt. She wanted to stop, to turn around, to do something. But all she could do was keep driving. By 1:30, the road felt eternal. Sam's eyes burned from fatigue, her neck stiff from tension. The radio had long since given up, a soft hiss of static her only companion. That was when she saw the hazard lights. A car sat on the shoulder ahead, blinkers flashing weakly into the dark. Relief flooded through her. Another human being. Proof she wasn't alone out here. She slowed, rolling her window down. "Hey," she called, leaning slightly toward the passenger side. "You need help?" The driver's door creaked open. A figure stepped out. Sam's blood ran cold. It was him. The same man. The same long coat. That same pale face twisted into something between a grin and a sneer. She didn't wait. She slammed her foot on the gas, tires spitting gravel as the Civic shot forward. The flashing hazards vanished in her mirror. Her chest heaved, breath coming too fast, her heart punching painfully against her ribs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet, she knew in her bones, that it was. The miles blurred. Sam lost track of time. She gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. And then, at 2:04 a.m., the engine coughed. Her eyes darted to the fuel gauge. Empty. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, slapping the dashboard. She had filled the tank. She knew she had. The gauge had been full when she left Flagstaff. The Civic sputtered once, twice, then died. The car rolled silently to a stop on the shoulder, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. Her hands shook as she turned the key. The engine whined, coughed, then fell silent. Nothing. The air felt heavier now. Denser. As though the desert itself were holding its breath. Then she heard it. Soft at first, crunching against gravel. Getting closer. The voice. Sam's lungs seized. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. Of course. The footsteps reached the back of the car. Her entire body screamed at her to run. But run where? Into the desert? Into nothingness? The handle of her driver's side door rattled. She clamped her hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. Then came the voice. Low. Gravelly. Scraping against her nerves like sandpaper. You should have picked me up when you had the chance. Her scream tore from her throat, filling the Civic. She shoved her shoulder against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock snapped upward with a sharp click. The window shattered inward. A pale hand reached through the glass. Morning came slow to the desert. The sun bled orange and red across the mesas, the light creeping over the endless black top of I-40. At 7:12 a.m., a state trooper spotted a silver Honda Civic parked on the shoulder, hazard lights dead. The driver's side window was smashed. Coffee cups littered the console. The driver's seat was stained with something dark, seeping into the fabric. But the car was empty. There was no sign of Samantha Pierce. Her purse and phone sat untouched on the passenger seat. The keys dangled in the ignition. Truckers talk about that stretch of highway, the long empty miles between Flagstaff and Albuquerque. They call him the highwayman. They say if you drive that road between midnight and 3 a.m., you'll see him. Sometimes he's a hitchhiker. Sometimes he's a stranded motorist. Sometimes he just steps into the middle of the road, daring you not to stop. And if you keep driving, if you ignore him like Samantha did, he'll find another way in. And you won't make it to the other side. The house looked normal enough. 2 stories, colonial style, with peeling blue paint and shutters that sagged like tired eyelids. The front yard was wild with weeds, yellowed grass pushing through cracks in the path that led to the door. A chain-link fence, bent in places, surrounded the property like a half-forgotten boundary. When the Harris family pulled their U-Haul up to the curb that first afternoon in late August, the neighbors watched from behind curtains but said nothing. Inside the truck, David Harris cut the engine and gave a satisfied sigh. Well, here we are. Beside him, his wife Melissa forced a smile. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and glanced at the house. It has potential, she said softly. From the back seat, 8-year-old Emma wrinkled her nose. It smells funny. It's just old, David reassured her. Once we clean it up, it'll smell like home. 6-year-old Josh pressed his palms to the glass, peering at the house with wide eyes. Does someone already live there? Melissa frowned. Why would you say that? Josh tilted his head. I thought I saw someone in the window. The house had stood empty for nearly 20 years, though the real estate agent had danced around the reason. Family relocation, she'd said with a stiff smile. Some maintenance neglect, but nothing a little love can't fix. The Harises had jumped at the deal. Money was tight. David's job at the factory paid enough to scrape by, and Melissa worked nights at a local diner. A 4-bedroom home in the suburbs for less than half its market value? It felt like fate. They unloaded the truck, box by box. Dust clung to everything. The air inside was heavy, stale, as though no window had been opened in decades. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, and in the upstairs hallway, a line of dark stains spread across the ceiling like veins. But the kids ran from room to room, claiming their spaces with squeals of excitement, and David wrapped an arm around Melissa's waist. "We'll make it ours," he whispered. That night, they slept on mattresses on the floor, surrounded by towers of unpacked boxes. The wind rattled loose shutters, and somewhere in the walls, something scratched. Melissa told herself it was just mice. At 3:12 a.m., Emma crept into her parents' room. "Mommy," she whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "There's a man in my room." Melissa bolted upright. "What?" Emma's lip trembled. He was standing by the closet. David grabbed a flashlight and searched the room top to bottom, closet, under the bed, even behind the curtains. Nothing. He reassured Emma, tucked her back in, and left the flashlight by her pillow. But Melissa didn't sleep the rest of the night. Over the next week, odd things began to happen. Boxes shifted. A stack of plates toppled from the counter though no one was near. Doors they were certain they'd closed stood open in the morning. At night, the house made sounds that went beyond settling wood, measured footsteps in the upstairs hallway, faint scratching at bedroom doors. Melissa tried to ignore it until the afternoon she was scrubbing the bathroom sink and heard a voice behind her. "Help me." She froze, heart hammering, and turned. The room was empty. "David," she called, stepping into the hallway. He was downstairs in the kitchen, out of earshot. When she checked the kids, Emma was drawing in her room and Josh was asleep on the floor with his toys. But she knew what she'd heard. On their second Saturday in the neighborhood, Melissa finally worked up the courage to introduce herself to Mrs. Fletcher, the elderly woman who lived across the street. Mrs. Fletcher stood watering her flowers, her gray hair pulled into a bun. At first, her expression was polite. But when Melissa mentioned they'd just moved into number 47, Sycamore Lane, Mrs. Fletcher's face went pale. "You bought that house?" she asked sharply. Melissa hesitated. "Yes, is something wrong with it?" The old woman pressed her lips together, glancing at the house. "You should leave." "Excuse me?" "Pack your children and go. Some places remember." Melissa blinked. "Remember what?" But Mrs. Fletcher turned back to her flowers, refusing to say another word. That evening, Melissa told David, but he laughed it off. "She's just a superstitious old woman. Every town has its ghost stories." Melissa wanted to believe him. By mid-September, the house no longer felt like theirs. Emma refused to sleep in her room, insisting the man by her closet watched her every night. Josh started sleepwalking, padding barefoot through the halls at 2 or 3 a.m., eyes wide open but unseeing. Melissa often found him standing at the top of the stairs, swaying slightly as if something were calling him down. And the upstairs hallway, long and narrow, lined with 3 bedrooms and the bathroom, became unbearable. Walking in daylight was fine. But at night, when the shadows pooled, it felt endless. Melissa swore she heard footsteps following her, always a pace behind, though the floor creaked only when she stepped. One night, as she carried a basket of laundry toward the bedroom, the bulb above her flickered and went out. She froze, heart hammering, and in the silence she heard breathing, slow, steady, right behind her ear. She spun, dropping the basket. Nothing. Only the dark stretch of hallway. But the clothes were scattered everywhere, as if someone had kicked them. David insisted on fixing up the basement to use as storage. One Saturday morning, he pulled up the old carpet, only to find dark stains embedded in the concrete. At first he assumed it was water damage, but the longer he scrubbed, the more the shape emerged, a wide, irregular pool that had seeped deep into the stone. Melissa stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed. "That's not water," she said quietly. David forced a laugh. "It's probably just rust. Or paint." But he avoided her eyes. That night, he dreamed of a family sitting at a dinner table, plates of food untouched, glasses full, while a dark figure stood in the corner, watching. He woke drenched in sweat, the faint sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. The breaking point. By October, the children had changed. Her purse and phone sat untouched on the passenger seat. The keys dangled in the ignition. Truckers talk about that stretch of highway, the long empty miles between Flagstaff and Albuquerque. They call him the highwayman. They say if you drive that road between midnight and 3 a.m., you'll see him. Sometimes he's a hitchhiker. Sometimes he's a stranded motorist. Sometimes he just steps into the middle of the road, daring you not to stop. And if you keep driving, if you ignore him, like Samantha did, he'll find another way in. And you won't make it to the other side. The first time Sarah and Michael Reeves saw the boy, he was standing at the edge of the woods. It was late September, the air already carrying the sharp bite of autumn. Their new house sat on a quiet road at the outskirts of town, backed by dense forest that stretched for miles. Sarah had been unpacking boxes in the living room while Michael carried furniture from the truck. Their daughter, Lily, 7 years old and full of restless energy, played on the swing set left behind by the previous owners. When Sarah glanced out the kitchen window to check on her, she froze. At the tree line stood a boy. He looked to be around Lily's age, thin, pale, dressed in clothes far too old-fashioned for this decade. A white button-up shirt, suspenders, trousers caked with mud. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. "Michael," Sarah called, her voice tight. "Come here." By the time her husband joined her, the boy was gone. The Reeves family had moved to Pine Hollow to escape the city. Michael's job as a graphic designer allowed him to work remotely, and Sarah longed for quiet, for space, for a fresh start after a difficult year. The house they bought was old but charming, a 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, creaky floorboards, and a sprawling backyard that melted into the woods. "This is where Lily can grow up happy," Sarah had said when they signed the papers. Safe. Free. But in the days that followed, she couldn't shake the image of the boy in the trees. It was a week later when Sarah overheard Lily talking in the yard. At first, she thought her daughter was just playing pretend, the way children often did. But then she heard a second voice. Faint. Male. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the sun. Lily sat cross-legged in the grass, speaking animatedly to the empty space across from her. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently. Lily smiled. "My friend. His name's Thomas." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Thomas? He lives in the woods. He says he's lonely." Michael brushed it off when Sarah told him later. "Kids invent friends all the time. It's healthy." But Sarah knew what she had heard. 2 voices. And when she checked Lily's drawings later that night, every page was filled with the same figure, a pale boy in suspenders, his eyes black circles that bled into the paper. It began with the knocks. 3 of them, sharp and hollow, always on the back door that faced the woods. The first time, Sarah thought it was just a neighbor. She opened the door. No one was there. The second time, she waited, heart pounding. When she finally looked, the yard was empty, but a line of muddy footprints led from the porch into the forest. The third time, she called the police. They searched the property, found nothing. That night, Lily woke screaming. "He wants to come inside," she cried, thrashing in her sheets. "Don't let him in, Mommy. Don't let him in." Sarah began researching. Local history books, old newspaper archives, whispered conversations with the older residents of Pine Hollow. She learned of a tragedy from nearly a century ago, a boy named Thomas Granger who disappeared in those very woods. His body was never found. But rumors spread of sightings, children claiming to see him standing at the tree line, waiting. The locals called him the Hollow Child. They said he was neither living nor dead, a spirit hollowed out by hunger and loneliness. He searched for friends to bring back with him, into the woods, where no one returned. Sarah felt cold reading it. That night, when she checked on Lily, she found her daughter's window open wide. Curtains billowed in the chill, and muddy handprints smeared the sill. Michael still didn't believe. "It's just stories. Small towns always have legends." But his confidence wavered when Lily began sleepwalking. He found her one night at 2 a.m., standing barefoot in the yard, her nightgown damp with dew. She was walking slowly toward the woods, arms outstretched. "Lily," he shouted, running to grab her. She didn't respond. Her lips were moving, whispering something he couldn't hear. He carried her back inside, trembling. The next morning, when he asked her what she had been doing, she said calmly, "Thomas wanted to show me where he lives." Sarah forbade Lily from playing outside unsupervised. The girl grew sullen, restless, insisting Thomas was sad without her. One afternoon, while Michael was on a work call, Sarah left Lily in her room with crayons and paper. When she returned, her daughter was gone. Panic clawed at her as she searched the house, calling Lily's name. A faint giggle drifted from the backyard. She rushed out. There, at the edge of the woods, Lily stood hand in hand with the boy. For the first time, Sarah saw him clearly. Skin pale as milk. Eyes like pits of tar. His lips stretched into a smile too wide for his face. When he noticed Sarah, the smile dropped. His head tilted at an unnatural angle. Sarah ran, snatching Lily's arm, yanking her back. The boy didn't move. He only watched, unblinking, as Sarah carried her daughter inside. That night, Lily sobbed into her pillow. "You made him angry." The hollow spreads. After that, the house changed. Shadows stretched too long across the floors. Cold spots lingered in the halls. The sound of weeping drifted through the vents. Michael finally admitted something was wrong when he woke one night to find the boy standing in the doorway of their bedroom. Motionless. Watching. He leapt from bed, heart pounding, but when he flicked on the light, the doorway was empty. "Sarah," he whispered, "we have to leave." But by then, it was too late. It happened on the coldest night of November. The knocking began again, 3 hollow raps at the back door. Then another 3 at the front. Then upstairs, at the windows. Every door. Every wall. The sound reverberated through the house like a drumbeat. Lily screamed from her room. Sarah and Michael rushed to her, but the door slammed shut in their faces. "Lily!" Sarah shrieked, pounding on the wood. From inside came her daughter's voice, "It's okay, Mommy. Thomas says I won't be lonely anymore." Then silence. When they broke down the door, the room was empty. The window gaped open, and muddy footprints led into the woods. The police combed the forest for days. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. They found nothing. No trace of Lily. No sign of the boy. Just a clearing deep in the woods, where the ground sank into a hollow depression. At its center lay a small wooden toy horse, half rotted, caked in soil. Sarah collapsed when she saw it. Lily had never owned such a toy. But in the local archives, Sarah later found a photograph of Thomas Granger from 1924. He was holding that same toy horse. The Reeveses moved away before winter fell. The house sits empty now, its swing set creaking in the wind, curtains fluttering in broken windows. But sometimes, when dusk settles over Pine Hollow, children swear they see two figures at the tree line. A pale boy in suspenders, and a little girl holding his hand. Both smiling. Both waiting. The first time Emily and David drove past the house, it looked abandoned. The property sat at the end of Ash Mill Road, where the cracked asphalt gave way to gravel and the forest pressed close against the shoulders of the lane. A sagging two-story home crouched behind overgrown weeds, its shutters hanging loose, roof tiles scattered in the yard like broken teeth. "God, look at that place," Emily murmured, peering out the passenger window. David only smiled. "You're going to hate me." That's the one. The house was cheap, absurdly so. A foreclosure the bank had practically begged someone to take. David, ever the optimist, saw potential, solid bones, big yard, secluded. With some elbow grease, it'll be beautiful. Emily wasn't convinced. The air around the place felt heavy, as though the house itself was holding its breath. But they were young, strapped for cash, and dreaming of building a future. So they signed the papers. By the first week of moving in, strange things had already begun. It was always around midnight. A faint creaking, as though someone were pacing the upstairs hall. Slow, deliberate steps that paused right outside their bedroom door. The first night, David shrugged it off as the house settling. The second night, Emily was the one who heard it. She clutched his arm, eyes wide. "It's right there," she whispered. The steps stopped when David flicked on the light. But the floorboards by the door were warm, as though someone had been standing there for hours. A week later, Emily noticed it, a sour, metallic odor that seeped through the vents. It would come suddenly, filling the room, making her gag. Then it would vanish just as quickly, leaving behind only a faint sweetness, like rotting fruit. One evening, she traced it to the basement. The smell grew stronger as she descended the wooden stairs, her flashlight beam trembling across crumbling stone walls. In the far corner, she found a door she hadn't noticed before. Narrow. Metal. Bolted shut. When she pressed her ear against it, she swore she heard breathing on the other side. It was Mrs. Harlow, the elderly woman from across the road, who finally said something. Emily had stopped by one morning, bringing muffins as a neighborly gesture. The woman stared at her with wide, pale eyes. "You bought that house?" "Yes," Emily said cautiously. Mrs. Harlow's lips pressed into a thin line. "You shouldn't be there. No one stays long. Not since the Greaves family." Emily frowned. "What happened to them?" Mrs. Harlow shook her head. 4 of them went missing. Husband, wife, 2 children. They said the house took them. Police found nothing. Her voice dropped. "It doesn't let people leave." That night, Emily and David decided to open the bolted door. Armed with a crowbar and hammer, they pried it loose. The hinges shrieked as the door swung inward, releasing a gust of air so cold it frosted their breath. The flashlight beam revealed a small chamber. The walls were covered in scratches. Long, desperate gouges in the stone, as though fingernails had clawed at it for years. And in the center of the floor sat a chair. Rusted. Strapped with rotted leather bindings. Emily dropped the flashlight. Her hands shook so badly she could barely pick it up again. "Jesus Christ," David muttered. "What the hell happened here?" Neither of them slept that night. A few days later, Emily woke to the sound of someone whispering. She sat up, straining to hear. From the corner of the room, in the dark, came a voice. Low. Male. Get out. Her scream woke David, but when he turned on the lamp, the corner was empty. Still, the impression of a figure lingered in her mind, tall, gaunt, with hollow sockets where eyes should be. From then on, the house seemed to turn against them. Doors they swore had been closed stood wide open in the morning. Windows locked themselves from the inside. Lights flickered until bulbs shattered, spraying glass across the floor. One night, David tried to leave, to drive to a hotel until they could figure things out. But the car wouldn't start. Every time he turned the key, the engine roared, then died. Finally, he looked up and saw the upstairs curtains moving. Something, was watching him from their bedroom window. And Emily was still downstairs with him. It was Emily who saw them first. In the hallway mirror, while brushing her hair, she caught a glimpse of two small figures standing behind her. A boy and a girl. Pale, dirt-streaked, their eyes wide and glassy. When she spun around, the hallway was empty. But later that night, faint giggles echoed through the house. Children's laughter. Coming from the basement. On the last night they spent in the house, the walls began to bleed. At first, Emily thought it was water damage, a slow dark stain spreading down the wallpaper. But when she touched it, her fingers came away red. Thick. Warm. The smell of iron filled the air. The house groaned around them, boards creaking as though under immense weight. Doors slammed one after another, trapping them inside. Emily! David shouted, pulling her toward the front door. But when he yanked it open, the doorway revealed not the yard, but the basement. The stone chamber. The chair. And sitting in the chair now was a man. Tall. Thin. His face obscured by shadow. In one hand, he clutched the rusted bindings. In the other, he reached out. Sit, he rasped. It's your turn. The next morning, Mrs. Harlow noticed the Reeves car still in the driveway. By evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. When police entered, the home was empty. No trace of Emily or David. But in the basement, the metal door had been bolted shut again. On the inside, and scratched into the stone were two new sets of marks. Fresh. Deep. As though someone had been clawing to get out.